This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hello everyone, this is Tony, Network Chief of We Made This. As you know, our podcast network brings together a brilliant assortment of talent who talk about all kinds of pop culture content, such as the episode you just listened to, or maybe you're just about to listen to. We're not going anywhere, but we'd love to keep the lights on for even longer if you're able to support our network on Patreon. For just £2 a month, you get your name in lights and the satisfaction of knowing you're helping us produce more great audio. And for £3 a month, you'll get your name in lights, but you'll also get access to an exclusive bi-monthly podcast from the We Made This talent pool on podcasting, pop culture, and, well, you tell us. We'll take your suggestions. For less than the price of a coffee per month, you can help keep We Made This going. Just head to patreon.com/We Made This. That's patreon.com/We Made This. And get the ball rolling. Now, back to your scheduled programming.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey!
We Made This.
Hello and welcome to Shipwrecked and Comatose, the podcast about Red Dwarf here on the We Made This podcast network. And after an absolute bounty of specials, we are back for Series 5 of Red Dwarf for the next 6 weeks. Every week for the next 6 weeks, we're going to be looking at episodes 1 to 6 of Series 5 of Red Dwarf. And I'm very excited to share this with you. My name is Mark Adams, IQ unknown, and with me at this time, hello Kurt.
Hello, how are you?
You missed the joke.
What?
You missed the joke.
What joke?
You were supposed to do Kurt North, IQ unknown, for fuck's sake, Kurt.
I apologise.
just say Kurt North, IQ unknown.
Kurt North, IQ unknown.
And also we've got Carl
Bryan, IQ missing.
So you might have got from our crap joke that I planned, that we are looking at Holoship Series 5, Episode 1. It was broadcast on the 20th of February, 1992. I was the ripe old age of 14 at this point.
12 for me. Just turned 12 as well.
What year was it again, sorry?
1992.
92. I'd have just turned 10.
There we go. Look at that. We were all wee bairns and we were already massively into Red Dwarf. I do remember this when it was first broadcast. It was the first one that I think I saw live. Maybe 4, not sure.
Yeah, 4 for me was definitely the first one I remember videoing off the telly. So, I mean, this is the thing we're going to come to with this. This series for me is really quite cinematic in comparison with other ones, I think. Just in terms of the look and everything. I think you're right that particularly 5 and 6 are considered the kind of peak Red Dwarf, where they perhaps had the biggest budgets, where they had the strongest stories and the characters were really established and the writers were on their absolute A game. And I know that's kind of an accepted opinion about Red Dwarf. I'm keen over the next 2 series to see just how good these were, because in my head, this was peak Red Dwarf, and in most people's heads, this was peak Red Dwarf. Yeah, this I think is what really cemented it for me as a fan. Just sort of like, this is great. You know, it wasn't just like a one series wonder for me. This series was it's very much an off the ship series as well, which I think is what keeps it quite fresh.
Yeah, well, I think so. This is a really interesting point in the Red Dwarf story as well, because this was directed by Juliet May, and so I, up until literally like this week, had just assumed that it was just the general crew. You know, Grant Naylor, Rob Grant, Ed Bye, Paul Jackson, and you might get a couple of others directors here and there. But Juliet May comes into this season, and there was quite a lot of issues behind the scenes with this. So they decided that Holoship was going to be first because it was the most accessible episode to get into. The Inquisitor had been moved back, and Juliet May hadn't wanted to, like, I think it was, what's the one after Inquisitor? Terraform.
Yeah.
She wanted to, like, sort of direct in a particular order. I think Holoship was delayed. It was only the third recorded because of the guest actress's availability. So they moved things around, and she was new to TV. Especially, you talk about the budget, and obviously, you know, you're still living within a restricted budget as well. But she really, really struggled with it, and the crew really struggled with it because she was a completely different directorial style to what they were used to. So there's quite a lot of stuff that's going on behind the scenes in these first 2 episodes that we're all going to talk about, where it's like, oh, okay, and with the whole Juliet May thing, and I say with Holoship as well, just while I remember, they redressed this set for Back to Reality at the end of the season as well. So there is budget constraints, but it's how they're using it and how they're able to do it. And Juliet May has been praised for some of the scenes, especially on Terraform, for example, which I'm sure we'll get into when we get to that episode. But there also is some difficulties behind the scenes as well.
All these behind the scenes intricacies and stories and information that you've been sharing, Kurt, I never knew any of this when I first watched it. I never knew any of it before we started this podcast, if I'm being brutally honest with you.
No, I didn't.
It's fascinating that they achieved Series 5 with all that shite going on in the background.
It's what part of the reason was as well, just to give you full context, is that Ed Bye, he hadn't approved season 5 at the point where he took another job on with his wife, Ruby Wax. And not long after he took that job on, they approved season 5. So the fact that he was contracted to do the show with Ruby Wax and would probably do that anyway, that's what caused all the issues in the first place.
Yeah, and it's perfectly understandable, you know?
Yeah.
As someone who runs his own business, if you're a freelancer and a mate says, can you pencil in this date for the diary? And then you get a firm booking, you really should take the firm booking, despite the fact that your mates might not be particularly pleased with you. And it's tough when you're a freelancer, actually. Completely understand Ed Bye's decision. It's a shame, but ultimately, you got to look after yourself and your family, haven't you? So, shall we get into the main episode and talk about Holoship? So the show opens with new credits, and highlights are the crew looking at a sonar, Starbug bursting through Red Dwarf's cargo bay doors, Rimmer in a checked bonnet with a penguin hand puppet, the cat being lasered down to his skeleton, some Jawas, and a naked Arnold Rimmer tied up, and a big hug.
No! Why do you keep doing this to me?
What?
Every season I forget to look at the credits.
Well, you know, I like doing this because I like to think back to what would you have thought the first time around when you saw these images. Obviously, the checked bonnet and a hand puppet, it's Mr. Flibble. But imagine you'd never seen Mr. Flibble and, you know, scantily clad Arnold Rimmer. Why? I just love looking at the credits and trying to think back. Imagine if you watched episode 1 of the series and you had no context for these images.
I mean, a big one, I think, for me is the cat gets smashed to a skeleton.
Yeah.
Like, if you did something now, like, say, I don't know, Doctor Who, and it had a montage over the start of what was coming up in the series, and it's like, oh, there's Daleks, and this person's going to get exterminated, and this guest star's going to appear, you know, it'd be ruined, wouldn't it? It's quite strange to have these credits where it's like, this is what's coming up over the course of the next 6 weeks. Oh, and there's some big stuff in here. But
It's very 90s, though, isn't it? You get the same experience at the start of a series of Buffy, for example. You watched episode 1, and there was, scenes from maybe the first 6 or 8 episodes of the series in that montage.
Yeah, they did it with Friends as well. Friends used to have like the clips at the beginning. So yeah, it is very 90s actually thinking about it.
But I don't know. I think you're right. The most shocking is the cat thing. But also, why the fuck are the Jawas in Red Dwarf?
yeah.
Because they are Jawas. Let's be real here. They look like fucking Jawas.
Thing is, though, at the time, all of this was on, and I didn't think anything of it.
No,
it just was like, oh, this is happening, and even stuff like, oh, the cat's getting obliterated. For some reason, that didn't trigger.
Is it not because of the style of Red Dwarf in itself, though? Because it's not a running story, is it?
Mm.
It's a clip show of episodes we haven't seen yet, rather than
oh,
look at this, the Daleks are coming back at the end. Well, that must be the finale.
Mm.
You know what I mean? It's not kind of that kind of show, is it?
True. And Red Dwarf is very guilty of, by the end of the episode, all the crap stuff, there's a reset button hit, It does do that in a lot of instances.
Mm.
So I guess there's not that much threat to the cat.
You'd hope not, no. But
no, he's the best. Still the best. Still my favourite. Love him.
Yeah.
So it starts with a film night in Starbug, and they're watching a romantic film. The cat looks anxious, Crichton is in awe, and Lister is in tears. Rimmer thinks it's blubbery schoolgirl mush and completely unrealistic.
Right. That is me. Just out there, off the bat, that is what I'm like.
Which one are you out of the four, Carl?
Probably a little Lister, little cat.
I'm fucking Lister.
Yeah.
Just blubbery mess. I cried at Coco when I watched that recently.
There is elements like that, for example. Yes, that kind of film I'd be like Rimmer totally, but I often get ribbed from my other half when I'm watching sci-fi shows and I end up bawling my eyes out. It's like, you bawl your eyes out of that, yet this has happened and you didn't bat an eyelid. Yep. So I tend to bawl my eyes out at things that are completely like sort of like, for example, when an animal dies on a show or something like that, and it's like that's the worst thing ever. You know what I mean? But I can't bring myself to think, oh, look at that horrible kind of love story. What's the love about? What's love about, Mark? What is it about?
If I knew that, I'd have done well at it in my life.
I don't tend to cry at sort of the traditional things, but sometimes I'll get caught. Normally, if I do cry at something, I'll have been caught unawares. Like if anyone's ever seen the film Very Long Engagement, which was the sort of follow-up film from the director of Amelie.
No.
I watched that, and it's all about a couple who were separated during the war, and the lady who's played by the same actress as in Amelie goes to find her husband, and it's a beautiful, beautiful film. And at the end of it, as the lights came up, I was there going, "I'm all right, I'm okay." But I looked at my friends, and they were all the same, like, "I might, go out, get a coffee. Yeah, I'm gonna get a coffee. I'll be back in a minute." Just that kind of thing.
I think I'm definitely worse if I'm with people and it's a shared emotion over something.
Yeah.
I'm much more likely to watch something with a friend and cry if they're in the same kind of place. I watched Coco with Fraser, for example, my co-host from Writing the Childhood. I've realised that, not everybody knows all of my friends intimately. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I watched Coco with a friend and we both got a little bit kind of teary. And I think you're right that if you're with other people, you're more likely to get teary. But fucking hell, if something makes you cry and you're on your own, that's the real emotional shit, maybe.
Mm. Yeah, I've got emotional stuff. I can't remember what it was. Once I was quite... I realised I was actually unwell But just leading into it, it's like, why am I crying at I can't remember what it was now, but it was something that I shouldn't really have been crying at. It wasn't that emotional, but I was just completely a mess. And I found out afterwards that I was actually quite unwell and running a fever. So I blamed it on that. But yeah, I was just like, I'm crying at this. Why am I crying? What's going on?
I think for me, I'm much more likely to cry if the sad music is particularly good.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm like Lost is a good example of that. Michael Giacchini's score is just always like sort of pushes those emotional beats with the piano and things like that. So yeah, I think the score has a lot to do with it.
Mm. Anyway, let's stop our confessions of crying at shit. There's, I think the whole point of the scene is a confirmation that Rimmer has never been in love, and he can't understand the sentiments of these films because of that.
He's just because what was the society he said he was part of when he was in early? Is it Love Celibates? Or was it something like that? He says he was part of in one of the earliest. He's not only not been in love, but he's anti-love. He thinks it's a disease that helps people spend all their money and all that kind of thing. He's very against the idea of it.
It's an odd one, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I would have thought you'd more likely to be like that if you had been in love and it had all gone to shit, rather than if you'd never experienced love.
I mean, maybe he has, and it's just something that's not been brought up on the show.
True. And there's a gag about Jesus being a carpenter that should have gone into showbiz, and they really don't like religion, do they?
No. It's interesting because they're actually making references to real things in that. King of Kings is a film. Which as a kid, I just thought it was them making something up, like that it's feasible there'd be a film called King of Kings, The Story of Jesus. But there is a film called King of Kings, The Story of Jesus. But yeah, they really aren't. It's when Crichton talks about later in the episode the simple carpenter's son who went on to run the greatest chain of pizza restaurants in the universe. They like subverting the whole Jesus thing.
They do.
And it's true to Rimmer's character as well, because when he says, and when he was carrying that cross up the hill, you would think, oh, well, any normal realistic bloke would have the mule kicked on the left, clobbered the one on the right, and then run over that green hill. Because you would be thinking, yeah, I need to get out of this fairly sharpish. And that's really true to Rimmer's character, which I like the fact that they set that up.
I mean, he's not wrong.
No. I'm not sure I'd be quicker than you could say Pontius Pilate, but I'd have been pretty quick.
If I'm marching through and somebody's given me a large wooden, beam that I could swing, I'd certainly consider trying to get out of there rather than carrying it, definitely.
A blip is announced by Holly and the crew heads into the cockpit. There's an unidentified missile headed straight for them, and an energy bolt comes straight through the cockpit window, and Rimmer is fascinated by it.
Yeah, it's interesting that only Rimmer is fascinated by it. When we learn what it is, it's from the Holoship. Maybe that's what it is. It's almost like catnip for holograms, so they can sense if there's any onboard a ship that they're coming across.
I think for me, this scene's significant because I'm pretty sure this is the first 2 minor flaws gag.
Yes, it is.
It is, yeah.
And that's a favourite of mine. It's always been a favourite of mine. And the cat's reaction where he doesn't clock that Crichton's taking the piss is just gold.
Yeah, it's that straight man, funny man situation. It really works well.
It's because it's a gag that carries through this series, but it doesn't really keep going, and I think that's a bit of a shame because Space Corps directives do keep going, and I thought it'd be nice for this to at least get a resurgence at some point.
I mean, I've not seen beyond Series 8. I'd love to see the occasional one in the later series.
Yeah. So this is the series where we get Robbie Rocket Pants, isn't it?
Yeah. That's like, I was just thinking that myself. I was like, where does Robbie Rocket Pants come in?
Yeah, that's Terraform.
So the energy bolt leaves Starbug and forms into a ship. And holy fuck biscuits, as models go, they've really outdone themselves.
It is really nice.
It's just beautiful.
I say I didn't. Obviously, there is a lot going on behind the scenes, but I didn't realize the budget was sort of lower. I thought this was actually an increased budget, and I was like, "Well, this looks fun." This was a sign of this and the sets. It was only sort of watching it again today that this and the Starbug cockpit look great. It's got all flashing lights, and there's bits and bobs everywhere, and things are moving, and it's.
I'm not necessarily saying the budget wasn't higher, but they were still talking about budget constraints and being to fit it in. It might just be that they might have had a slightly higher budget, but have had to have learned over the 4 or 5 seasons to make best use of the budget rather than that kept way around. So I don't know what the budget was.
Yeah, I mean, when we do get to the initial sort of Dave series, I do know a couple of things about sort of the way the sets are built and utilised to save money. That'll be, I think, it's quite interesting to be mentioned at the time.
Yeah, well, there's the whole thing of actually going and doing reshoots and stuff and all kinds and that, but we'll talk about that when we get there.
Yeah.
So, the CG of the energy bolt is fine. For 1992, it's really not that bad at all. But just these models, man.
Yeah.
It goes to show, because before CG, they could make stuff which looked better than CG. It does make me wonder sometimes, like, they wouldn't have used CG in Series 7 if it wasn't for the fact they got the wrong models due to a scheduling thing. So I'd have been fascinated to see what 7 would have looked like if they'd had models as well, because it really is like an understated star of the show is the whole team at what would have probably been BBC Effects at the time, and I think it's the Mill now, isn't it? They went independent.
So the energy emission takes Rimmer, and Kat suggests they run. Rimmer is beamed into a room and is greeted by Irvana Crane. He's on a Holoship, and Rimmer can touch her.
Yeah, I thought it was quite telling that the first thing he says to the woman who, spoiler alert for this episode, he falls in love with is, "You touched me." I thought that was quite nice.
Wait, what? He falls in love with her? Wait, did that happen? All right, okay.
Also,
sorry, Kurt.
Speaking of like sort of the fact that you've got this this budget and the time that you've got to do it. Yeah, actually, this scene there was quite a lot that was cut out. There's like 10 minutes worth of footage that they had to cut, and they were saying there was a few things that they wanted to bring in. So, for example, the finished product, there was, Chris Barry had said it wasn't exactly what he would like to have done. There was a lot more building of the relationship between the two of them, and they've had entire scenes where they were, in bed. It was trying to persuade Rimmer to have sex, and Rimmer was being really trying to avoid it and things like that. And there's a scene actually when they meet as well that's been cut out as well. So there's elements of this episode where as you say, to fit 25 minutes into what could be an hour and a half TV movie, they've actually had to cut quite a lot out. And we'll get into some of the points later on as well. There's a particular scene which feels rushed, but we'll get into that later.
I think a lot of Red Dwarf does feel rushed because of the ambition of the show. People who write for this show have got no budget, but brilliant ideas. And again, the 25-minute thing, I wonder if this had been made a little bit later, it would have ended up being like a 45-minute episode type situation.
Because this, on British telly, we didn't really go for like hour-long recurring dramas, did we? If it was something like that, it'd be a one-off or like a mini series. Whereas now, obviously, we can we do them all the time, 45 minutes to 50 minutes. But it would have been interesting to see some of these shows played out to the length that they wanted them to do, because I don't think they would have dipped in quality being longer, because it sounds like a lot of it was mostly character work and dialogue.
Yeah, there was character work. There's some. I'll talk about it now because we're here anyway. But there was some character work. There was Holly scenes, which I don't know much more about what happens after 5 and 6, but it feels like Hattie at this point is feeling a bit left out because there's so much to fit in the episodes coming up, including this one, that we don't see too much of her. She becomes just a talking head that's on there saying "Red Alert" or thing.
This was very Holly light, actually. Now you've said that, you're right. This episode was particularly Holly light.
There was a scene that which is part of the reason why I want to bring this up is, and it always frustrates me when I see it. It's when he's doing the 2 computer bits work and he's having the test, and it cuts and it's like it seems so quick that he's up to 320 and she's down to 291, and it's like, all right, well, she's going to pass that in 5 seconds, but it seems like loads of time goes on. And apparently there was more information about the meld that he's had. And when he gets back on the ship, there's a Holly scene there, and they've completely cut that out because it was showing Rimmer being a bit, not obnoxious, but the way Rimmer normally is, so there's a bit of like to and fro with that, but they completely cut that out, and Hattie wasn't particularly happy about that from what I believe.
Oh, I think I've seen that scene. He comes running in, and Holly just goes, "Hello, Holly, how are you?" "Oh, I'm not too bad, Holly. Thanks very much." She's just annoyed that I remember that one.
Yeah, that's the one, yeah.
It does seem slightly out of character, that one, so I can probably see why that was cut.
So, just want to mention, Ivana Crane, it's Bubble.
Well, pre-Bubble, isn't she?
Was it pre-Bubble?
Yeah. So this is quite early in the career. She's done a few bits. I had a look. She's done a few bits and bobs, but she wasn't on Ab Fab yet. She wasn't on a lot, really. She turned up in stuff like, I didn't realize she's in Memphis Belle in a very sort of small part, and she's in The Witches, the original Witches, but she's not made it to Ab Fab yet. That's a bit of a while off yet.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I thought that Absolutely Fabulous had already started.
Yeah, she was in Red Dwarf in 92. Before this, she was in things like Boone and Victoria Wood. But she, let's see.
If she's in things like Victoria Wood, it makes sense why she got on a show like this then.
Yeah, so let's see.
It's the same circles, because I think she, I'm thinking more the director. The director, Juliet, got on the show because Paul Jackson was producing stuff that she was directing. That's how she got onto the show.
Yeah, so look in here. So Ab Fab came out in November of 92. So yeah, it was just before, literally, the start of the year.
Good grief. There you go. Rimmer's in a lift with Ivana, and they get to the sports and sexual recreation deck. They discuss the lack of sex deck on Red Dwarf and how unhealthy it is to not have regular sex. And Ivana explains the concept of family was discarded in the 25th century as they're bad for your mental health. They've also discarded monogamy and romantic relationships. So I was with her up to the point where family and romantic relationships were got rid of.
It's weird because she also mentions that they decreed that all psychological hang-ups can be blamed on their parents, and essentially Rimmer's proven right this whole time. It really just plays into when they talk about, Holoship's crews are legendarily arrogant, and everything they say is sort of Rimmer's worst side of his personality, which I thought was quite interesting.
I like how it magnifies what Rimmer was saying at the beginning. So it's magnifying that to re-emphasize that process. But yeah, it is interesting, as I say, that the whole, which TV does a lot of, like your parents affect you and whatever, because it is something that's a minefield and a gold mine at the same time to delve into characters like that.
Yeah.
I am going to bring up just one thing with regards to this scene, and that is that she says, what does she say? Let's have a look. She says something along the like of about pregnancies and
there's no risk of infection or pregnancy.
No risk of infection. What is in this season? In this series, what is the episode towards the back end of this series?
Rimmer gets a virus. Yeah. So again, their arrogance just working against them.
Yeah,
it is possible. I mean, the one thing as well that I do enjoy about this scene is obviously when, as we said at the start of the episode, we're all in our sort of early as, and I was 10. I'd probably not really, I didn't know what sex was. I just knew this bit was funny. And when she asks Rimmer, what do you do for runs? And he's, what do you do for sex? He goes, we go for runs. Even though I know what that is now, at the time, I didn't understand what that meant. I don't know what it was. Like, we go for runs. I was like, oh yeah, that's quite funny. But not a clue what he meant by that, even though he just meant go for runs.
This makes me smile because I was a relatively naive kid as well, but I'm certainly not naive when it comes to sex as a openly gay, promiscuous man in my 40s. And I agree with a lot of what is said here. The extremes, obviously not, but I do think that there is damage to people's mental health if they're not having sex. I'm not sure that monogamy is healthy personally. And yeah, there's a lot here that is quite forward thinking. They've obviously taken it to a massive extreme and made it ridiculous. But I think there's actually quite a lot of merit in what they say here.
Yeah, twice a day they've got to have sex.
I mean, I'd probably only want it once a day.
Yeah, and the delivery, Jane Horrocks' delivery of constant, guilt-free sex.
Yeah,
it's the way she pronounces sex. You're absolutely right.
I think it took about 3 listens to work out what she says in the middle, because guilt-free almost kind of crawls out of her mouth. Guilt-free sex.
And I think actually, yeah, I know I joked about the fact that we do have quarantine later in the series, but I think that they were right to actually put an emphasis on the fact of, like, you know, because it's quite a subject, especially around the AIDS stuff.
Yeah.
That in 1992, that they are making a point of saying, you know, that they are holograms, they don't catch disease, and, you know, the pregnancy stuff. That kind of sidelining that. So it's like as if to say, look, we're aware of that. Well, let's not necessarily put those two in the same place, because they're obviously what they're promoting at that point. So I think there's an element of that as well, which I'd forgive them for with the quarantine one, but it definitely does do that to put it off on one side, really.
Yeah, I think the reality is there's a real honesty amongst the Holoship crew about what they feel like sex is to them, and that's a very kind of important thing. I'm very honest about sex. I'm perhaps not conventional in my opinions about sex, but I'm probably more close to the attitudes of the Holoship than not.
Is this your way of telling us that why you don't do much sport, Mark? It's because you're too busy shagging.
I mean, I am slim and pretty good looking for 42, so I don't do any exercise. So, you know, work out what you will, Carl.
Yeah. Badminton, nah, sex mate.
So genuinely, for me, I do use, funny you say badminton, I do use badminton as a metaphor. You can have a game of badminton with someone that you love. Mm-hmm. You can have a game of badminton with someone that you know. And you can have a great game of badminton with anybody, regardless of how well you know them. And there's no emotional attachment to badminton. So why is there emotional attachment to sex? Shall we move on?
I was going to say, I'm quite competitive. I'd probably get quite an emotional attachment to badminton.
Competitive sex sounds awesome. Let's get that done. Maybe not together.
I'm more of a tennis player myself, but anyway. Bigger balls.
So we're back.
Balls rather than shuttlecocks.
So we're back on Starbug, and Crichton is very worried about Mr. Rimmer. Holly's communications have been ignored, and like you said before, Kurt, they realise it's a holoship, and then Crichton explains that they are notoriously arrogant, and there's some kind of sci-fi techiness, but basically it's a crew of geniuses.
Yeah, I like the fact that that Crichton explains how he knows about it. He's not just like they joke about in a lot of the documentaries, exposition on legs. He learnt about it before he left the solar system, so he wasn't just in almost like in his spare time when he wasn't just being like a service droid. He was looking at stuff and reading about things, and so it kind of plays into Crichton's personality. He's always been on a kind of thirst for knowledge and things like that. I like that little thing about Crichton. Although Holly could have done it as well, which would have given more Holly in the episode.
Yeah,
true. A hologram beams aboard and starts reporting back to the holoship that we learn is called the Enlightenment. He's particularly rude and condescending, and then Lister uses a cigarette packet to imitate the comm device and reports back to Red Dwarf. Lister threatens him with a holo whip, and he exits quickly. And having seen the Smeg-Ups, the bit where Craig Charles eats the cigarette, that is not a fake cigarette.
I don't know why the fuck I ate that cigarette. It's one.
I mean, it's a perfect bit of guest casting. Don Warrington with that voice, it fits what that character is doing perfectly in feeding back information to the ship and being very talking down to the actual crew.
Yeah,
it's just a perfect bit of what's this? A human being or a very close approximation is so well done, well delivered.
I think what's really fun and subversive about it is, a relatively well-respected, quite well-known British actor in Don Warrington. He's a dignified man, and there's a gag about the size about his dick. It says to me that someone like Don Warrington is much more of a better sport than perhaps you might have expected.
Yeah, I mean, those uniforms, they don't, they cover it, don't they? There's everyone's very Ken doll in those outfits.
Yeah.
They're really good outfits. As I said, it is one of my favourite costumes, like with the padding and all that, so the quilting, and is it like velvet or velour underneath? Just the kind of thing you expect a sort of arrogant crew of super geniuses. Just like,
I know we talked. Yeah, I know we talked about the Red Dwarf night in one of the specials recently, and this to me feels the most overt take on Star Trek: The Next Generation to me, because they mention, well, not necessarily Next Generation, but Star Trek in itself, because in the earlier scenes, you've got somebody says number one, which is like, that is a typical like Star Trek line, number one. Mm-hmm. They've got a Russian crew member who is very much like Chekhov. It feels like a Star Trek episode, and like someone will learn something along their journey to the end of the episode, and then they'll use that at the end, and that's like a perfect piece. The uniforms are kind of like you almost, they're like the movie uniforms in some ways, a little bit, but obviously the padding's like ridiculous on that. This to me feels like it is kind of like saying, well, look at Star Trek: The Next Generation. That's very kind of prim and proper, and look at Sir Patrick Stewart kind of thing. Yeah. But again, not necessarily taking an overt mick out of it, but heightening what Star Trek is. And it feels like this is the one episode in my eyes so far that's kind of overtly kind of, just kind of like just pushing that boundary a little bit on it.
Yeah. It's definitely a gentle poke. There's no malice, there's no savagery, but it's clearly a poke at Next Gen.
Yeah, I mean, when we meet the captain, he is Shatnering it up a bit.
Oh, yeah.
It's a superhuman.
Superhumans.
Yes, you
So-
can have it all. You can have it all.
So you're
but yeah,
right.
but talk about the actual scene with the cigarette. Listed to Red Dwarf. That is just like we're talking about pivotal moments or memorable moments in Red Dwarf history. That scene, listed to Red Dwarf and Binks, is just a classic scene.
The realization on Don Warrington's face as Lister reveals that they've got a hollow whip
Yeah,
as well, which is something that you almost think, oh, he's making it up. There's no such thing as a hollow whip. But then later on in the series, we see a hollow whip.
yeah.
So we have a nice little callback to that Lister's not making it up, that he's got a hollow whip.
Yeah. So you talked about meeting the crew of the Enlightenment, and that is the next scene. Ivana introduces Rimmer to the captain, who is called Platini, and commanders Pushkin and Navarro. Pushkin is the Russian officer that you talked about, and Navarro is a little bit kind of Jonathan Frakes, I thought, as well.
As a kid, and for a very long time, I thought the captain introduced himself as Air Cool Platini. And it's only years later that I realised it's Hercule Platini, not Air Cool Platini. Because that was like, oh, his name's Air Cool Platini. I was like, what a wanker. But now I realise he's Hercule Platini.
Good. So they all confirm their IQs when they introduce themselves, and there's a massive gag that we kind of played on at the start where Rimmer doesn't know his. And Rimmer says that the ship is wonderful and that he would like to join. Platini kind of laughs at him, and he then explains that, and this is actually almost legit as well, that he's commanded Red Dwarf for 4 years and he's earned his pips.
Yeah, he may not have the paperwork to say he's a captain, but he's done the on the job. He's got the experience to say that I have. Whether to say he's single-handedly captained a ship on his own is here and there, because there's obviously the whole crew. But yeah, he's been there. He knows how to do a lot of what's required.
Mm.
He's just bad at exams.
Platini,
and again, that's another Star Trekism that people get promoted in the field, or because of what they've done. I mean, Wesley Crusher's the obvious one. The fact that he's just a kid on the ship, eventually gets like acting ensign and stuff. And there's actually reflections on that. I don't know if what come first, but there's certainly an episode where he's having to do tests and stuff like that, and it's very kind of similar. So I actually think that Red Dwarf, to be honest, maybe season 3, season 4, it could be around the same time, but it might even be Red Dwarf did it before them, but we'll see.
Platini explains that the only way in is a game called Dead Man's Boots, which is an IQ test one-on-one with a current crew member, and the ship's computer picks the opponent for the most stimulating contest. The ship predicts a 96% chance of Rimmer's failure.
I thought it was interesting because they sort of said, "Oh, we've got a full crew," but when it's revealed sort of who it is, but she's like crew member like 4,536. It's just a massive crew by the sounds of it.
Yeah, that's more than 4,000 more than Red Dwarf.
Yeah,
but would it be crew member 4,036 because crew member 4,022 got deleted?
Good point. Yeah. It's an interesting way in or out. I can't imagine any of the armed forces are doing that at the moment. Like, well, you must fight each other in essentially a quiz, and the other one gets killed.
It does feel very elitist, though.
Yeah. Well, as I say, it's not like give them 2 swords and fight to the death. It's who's brainier than the other one, and it's still like that gladiator mentality, isn't it? It's just like an enhanced kind of more of a, as you say, elitism more than actual physicality. It's more using the mind.
Rimmer follows Ivana out, and she asks him quite blatantly and bluntly if he'd like to have some sex. And having been in gay bars, that happens.
I don't think it's just gay bars, Mark.
No, but the kind of, do you want to have sex? I've literally had blokes walk up to me and go, do you want to have sex? And, you know, I have done.
So you've not done that in straight bars then, Mark?
Oh, dear. I wouldn't know what to do. So they do have sex.
It is quite funny how the confidence level just alters depending on what kind of venue you're in.
100% confident. Take him to a straight bikers man bar, and he'd be like,
Now I get on all right with bikers because I like rock music, but I wouldn't have the balls to ask a biker for sex. Moving on, they go to Ivana's quarters and they have sex. Rimmer enjoyed it, and Ivana talks about how different sex was with him, and then freaks out when she works out that Rimmer likes her. He backtracks.
Wasn't like that before.
Yeah. He backtracks and then beams out, and Navarro confirms to her that she's Rimmer's opponent. And yeah, however flippant I might be about the whole sex is recreation thing and agree with a lot of what's said in this, it's not quite as simple as that, and waters do get muddied very quickly if you're not completely honest with each other. And I think that's depicted very, very well in this scene, actually.
I mean, this is another case of me mishearing stuff, and I think it is purely from the voice that Jane Horrocks chose to do her performance with. When she describes Rimmer as having Rimmer in sex like a Japanese meal, but I misheard it, and I think I may have had subtitles on at the time, which are always legendarily wrong, especially on like teletext. But I misread that as Japanese mule. I was like,
I thought it was mean? Japanese mule.
So many portions. Was it?
So many small portions, but so many courses.
Yeah. And I thought it was Japanese mule, but it's not. It's Japanese meal.
In my entire viewing history, I thought she said mule.
No, it's meal.
Good grief.
It's a strange accent she's gone for, to be fair. But it's, that was just another thing of... I didn't realise. And the way she describes how sex between the Enlightenment's crew doesn't sound particularly... I know that they treat it as just, exercise, but it doesn't sound like particularly fun. They talk about flight plans and project stuff, and it's like, that doesn't sound fun.
No.
So... we get back to Red Dwarf, and Rimmer asks Crichton for a mind patch. Crichton warns him against it and says that it's incredibly dangerous, but Rimmer is willing to take the risk because he wants to be a somebody, or at least somebody that he considers a somebody. He goes through all the reasons why he's disappointed, and they're all related to his job. Crichton and Lister argue that your job doesn't define you, but Rimmer is not hearing what they have to say. Crichton says the sex policy on board is immoral and tacky and asks Crichton, Cat and Lister for backup. And yeah, they don't give him that backup.
It's the reaction of Craig Charles and Danny John Jules to the "am I the only one that finds having sex twice a day on command a little bit tacky" is perfect. They do good frozen in time acting.
Yeah, it's brilliant. But I think this scene also establishes that the cat's winding up and gags at Rimmer's expense has escalated. And that stays consistent in Series 5, that the cat goes for Rimmer rather than ignores him from this point on.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is more... This is probably we've talked about how he becomes more and more human as the show's gone on, and I think, especially in the next episode, Inquisitor, there's a bit more scope in his relationships with other people. Like in this, we've got the two minor drawbacks gag with Crichton and his interactions with Rimmer. It's good to see him getting a bit more. It's not just him and Lister being like buddy. He's actually going for relationships with other people, even if it is just him going straight at Rimmer.
Yeah, but then what I like in itself is that he's learnt off. It's like same with Crichton in some ways. He's learnt off Lister to do that. You know, it's the fact that I know later on we'll get scenes where he's like, I actually agree with it. I think we've had it in the previous season. I agree with what you're saying. I can't help you though. Because it's like I've got loyalty to my owner in some ways, so which is a nice little touch, really.
Yeah. Next scene, they're in medbay, and Crichton is explaining how the mind patch will work. He'll be getting the knowledge of two extremely gifted colleagues, but his personality retains control of his brain. He reminds him of the danger, but Rimmer's still having none of it and tells him to proceed. Glory or insanity awaits. And this is so reckless for Rimmer. And I love it. It shows just how important everything that's going on is to Rimmer, because normally he's a massive coward. And glory or insanity, he'd rather have nothing in most situations.
I think he potentially sees this as like a one-shot opportunity, doesn't he? Because, in all the other events that happen, whether or not he gets like a mind patch or whatever, it's with what he perceives now as his own kind, and he feels like his life's been getting to this point, and that's not something that we've had in previous episodes of like him feeling like there's like this is a one shot. This is not like coming across aliens or something. This is like okay, this is probably where I belong, and and obviously with the sex. It's obviously a big draw, so yeah.
I mean, also, sorry, go on, Kurt.
No, I was just going to say the grass is always greener on the other side, isn't it? Occasionally, so
yeah. I mean, it's also always greener on the other side.
Well, I know, but
we've got to look at it. We can look at it as well, and like we're still a good this being the first episode of 5, we're still a good season away from Hardlight, or even the discovery that at this point nobody is aware that Hardlight even exists, because it's something that Legion came up with. So for Rimmer, seeing this crew, it's like I can be real again. I can touch, I can drink, I can, shag. I can
have sex.
But for him, it's just like everything that he doesn't have on Red Dwarf, sex aside, like, a physical presence, respect of his peers, the fact that he can leave all of his emotional baggage behind because it's been declared on the ship to be irrelevant. It is literally everything he's ever wanted. So yeah, the fact he's going for it, despite the fact that everyone's telling him how bad an idea it is. Like, I love the fact that Crichton says we have to take into account how big of a drag your own personality is on him.
Yeah. I love that line.
Yeah.
So there's a quote by, this is me being super literary graduate, by the way, but there's a quote by Jeanette Winterson that I have loved since I read Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit at university. And it is so beautiful. It's in its simplicity, and it's perfect for the situation. What you risk reveals what you truly value. What a sentence that is. Love Jeanette Winterson. I didn't think I'd be quoting Jeanette Winterson today, but go me.
That's what I like about this show. We just never know what's going to happen.
I thought you'd say that's what I like about the show, you being fucking inane.
Well, that too. Yeah, we can go down the toilet. It's everything is on the table and potentially under it or over it.
All of this sex could be anywhere, couldn't it? I am becoming more and more like bloody Sean Connery, and that's not what she sounds like in the show. Miss Moneypenny.
Want to have sex.
Fuck's sake. Right, get on with it. Crichton and Lister are walking, and Lister asks about Rimmer. Crichton confirms he's reading at insane speeds and isn't the Rimmer that they know. When they meet him, he spouts mathsy, sciencey bollocks that I had no idea about, and then asks if they'd like to hear his Japanese poetry translated into Mandarin. Rimmer is then ported to the Enlightenment for the contest.
I mean, credit to Chris Barry for reeling off the shape the dodecahedron, that's section
The
polygon.
polydridocahedron, a hexasexahedroacticon, RDB dolly, hey, decadedron. Something like that.
Yeah.
That thing.
Yeah.
Because he's doing it that fast. I don't believe he's reading it. And
he'll have learnt it phonetically.
Yeah.
And he's just had to learn, which in some next week's episode, we'll talk about a scene that was cut where it's renowned that Robert Llewellyn can't say these type of things, and they actually physically cut it from the entire episode.
Good grief.
Yes, I remember what we're talking. Yeah. But I mean, this one, you get the feeling that he probably turned to the crew and went, I'm probably only going to get this first try, so please don't cock it up.
Yeah. And I will say, I was watching this the other night, and my girlfriend turned around to me and just was like, I know it's coming here. And it's the bit where he goes,
yeah,
like that. She just loves that. And she loves the in Quarantine. It's just Chris Barry, when he does those type of things, are just amazing. What he can do with his nostrils and rubber face is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously got all that experience on like Spitting Image and stuff. So he must have drawn the voice from somewhere, but with the Crichton, the over pronunciation of it, because they've said like he's got two personalities in his brain, but he's got the power of veto over it. You know, is it technically Rimmer, or is it somebody else that's kind of more dominant that's coming out there? That's the thing.
It's not explored at all in this episode, but there is real kind of hard sci-fi about implanting knowledge from other people into your brain and whether or not that makes you less you. And it was explored really unpleasantly and really quite rapily in a program called Doll's House by Joss Whedon, if you remember that.
Oh, yeah.
Elijah Dushku. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's not explored at all in this. There's so much that you could say about this, but it's really not a focus of this particular episode other than for that gag, I think.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think there was more scene explaining a bit more about this meld, but they cut that out. So there was elements that they did originally have. But as I say, with it being 10 minutes over, it's obvious why they've cut it out, really.
Yeah. So on the Enlightenment, Platini explains the rules, and it includes being in isolation and having 2 stations. Rimmer says he'll do both stations at once, and Platini says that's impossible. Rimmer does it anyway. Rimmer does very well, and even switches hands at one point until the mind patch fails.
I mean, what a moment when he changes hands, though. It's so funny because it's the timing of like him going it's just that gap. It's brilliant timing.
I wonder if it's, you say that there's a lot of, or at least a lot of people, I wonder if, and I don't agree personally because I find maths perplexing, but a lot of artists say that there's maths in artistry, and things like the rhythm, it's almost musical in the way he's doing these maths problems. I don't know. I think it was deliberately timed in the way you said to show the kind of link between science and art.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the thing of there's the phrasing of when you're doing something and you're really into it, you're in your flow. You know, or you're going full flow. I think there is a rhythm to a lot of things like that. And the thing that bemused me was when they said, did they say at the beginning there was like 200,000 questions or something really silly like that? I was like, which kind of really emphasizes that somebody's going to die here. But it's 200,000 questions. This isn't a best of 10. And then somebody gets erased. It's going to be thorough as to whether this person's going to take over your position or not, which I quite like. It doesn't make it as flippant as you think it's going to be. It's Chris Barry's portrayal of Rimmer in this. It makes you wonder if Rimmer's arrogance in, I need to do this in order to do it, it's kind of gone too far, and that's what rejects the thing because he's burning out too fast.
Yeah, it's the power of veto, isn't it, as well? So, as you say, is it? His mind is a wonderful thing to talk about. I'm sure we'll talk about it in future episodes as well, where his mind just ruins things for him.
Yeah.
So,
Better than life's the perfect example, isn't it?
Yeah.
On a slightly less serious sci-fi note, those computers, the size of the keyboards, man. If anything dates this episode, it's that.
I don't know. In space, we're all typing on a BBC.
It's just, it's just, they're just going back. Vinyl came back.
Yeah.
So it's just the fact that they've gone for something that's a bit quaint, going back to the 1990s. As a style.
In the same way we do it with architecture, maybe in the future they're doing it with spaceships. Like, it's a Baroque spaceship. It's a brutalist spaceship.
And don't forget those Commodore VIC-20s. They were classic. Let's get some of them in.
Yeah.
So Rimmer bolts and ports back to Red Dwarf. He walks in on the crew interviewing for his replacement. The first candidate would rather not exist than be in the company of the boys from the Dwarf, and Rimmer asks for Crichton to sort another patch. Unfortunately for him, Crichton explains that the rejection syndrome means that it's always a one-time deal. Rimmer is devastated and then loses his temper about them already replacing him. He decries his misfortune and heads back to the Enlightenment to withdraw.
Yeah, this leads to one of a weird debate between Red Dwarf fans is how are the two holograms there at the same time?
Oh, for fuck's sake!
But I think it's fairly easily like Rimmer's being projected by the Holoship during this.
Yeah,
which I think is the easiest way to do it. I do like the fact that the initial interviewee is like, "Do you have no interest in horse riding or ballet?" It's like, where are their horses on Red Dwarf? You wouldn't be able to do that if you were brought back anyway.
I mean, I know we'll talk about this in future seasons, but we discussed this in the, as I say, the special we did. But it goes to what they do with Kochanski as well.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of like play this equestrian opera class female aspect of against the boys. It always seems to be that it's. And I know that comedy shows have to like sort of do a bit of more delineation than you would in real life. So characters are a lot more comic booky or a lot more like sort of stretched out and and pumped up. But it always seems that it go back to this whenever it comes to a female. It's the class and the female thing to get it away from what Rimmer and Lister especially is.
Horses and Ponies is a little bit of an overdone and cheap posh gag, but I guess it's just a throwaway line here, whereas it's more problematic when that becomes pretty much all that Kochanski's about.
Yeah, I think it was kind of, I almost thought it was a bit cheap that the overplay on Curry, it does come back in quite a big way in later series, but it felt a bit over the top. The whole,
I do like the way that Crichton delivers the line, though. It's like, well, that time last year when you had pizza, but you didn't like it, so you bought curry sauce. The actual line is brilliant. It's brilliantly delivered. But I know what you're saying it's too much.
To be fair, I would totally love a curry pizza. That would be right down my street.
I don't think the cat eats curry. Although it came across in this that he did, and I think he's too cool to eat curry. Cause
we've only ever seen the cat eat Crispies.
Yeah, that's true. We have only,
He plays with the chicken, doesn't he?
Yeah. But,
yes, you're right. He does have chicken. And he has fish. Today's fish is trout à la crème.
Yeah.
Good point. Well made.
And, no, I've just remembered something. No, I'm not going to mention it. It's for later seasons that you haven't seen, Mark.
Okay.
I do like Rimmer's list of like credits to his name. Tosspot by royal appointment, I think, is probably one of the most British insults you could come up with.
Yeah.
So back on the Enlightenment, and Rimmer's in the lift with Pushkin, and she invites him for some sex if he wins the contest. Yavanna enters and shows concern for Rimmer. He says he's withdrawing and admits the patch to her. She expresses her concern, and he explains why he tried it. She gives him a pep talk and says that he's nice, can't give up, and will get his dream. And it is just like a proper romantic film, this, isn't it? It's clearly inspired and it's done really well. I think this scene's great.
Yeah, she calls him Arnie as well when she gets in the lift. And I thought that was a nice little touch. I do want to quickly, because we've not really mentioned it, is the actress who plays Pushkin. Her accent, or her choice of accent, with the kind of bubbly, the probability of failure, I love, it's such a choice.
Oh, it's a piss take of
Chekhov.
Chekhov, yes, that's right.
But it looks like it takes a lot of work for her to push it out of her mouth like that, with blows the cheeks up as she's talking. And it's really, I think it's really well done. And I can imagine she practiced it in the mirror, because you can't. I don't think it's a voice that on the day you go, I'm going to do this.
No,
it's definitely one you've worked on. I think it deserves a bit of credit that she did this voice. And remember, we can have sex. That's not the accent, but that's just the
literally everyone that we've tried to do an impression of on this ended up sounding like Sean Connery. Yes. We are not talented like these people are.
Well, we can all do a Connery. It's actually from Red Dwarf. It's in future series. They have Gary Martin, who's the voiceover guy. He's the voice of Epidine. And he's on one of the DVDs talking. Yes! Exactly. And he starts talking about how he does, because he's like the Sugar Puff Monster and all that kind of thing from adverts. And
amazing.
He says, like, the best way to do Sean Connery is you have to start by saying sweaty bollocks. He said
sweaty bollocks.
That's the phrase to get you into the Sean. Sweaty bollocks.
Sweaty bollocks.
Yeah. And that's, from talking to people who do voices, that is the way to do it. Is you've got to find a phrase to slide you into the accent.
Yeah,
and for Sean Connery, sweaty bollocks is the way to get into it.
Amazing. Rimmer beams back to Red Dwarf and tells the boys that he won as his opponent withdrew. He then prepares to leave and does the wonderful, wonderful people I met speech that I know is a favourite of yours, Kurt.
It is a favourite of mine. Yeah.
The other three seem genuinely upset, which I think shows a lot about how not only the show's developed, but also the relationships of the characters in the show have developed as well.
Yeah, you've got the very quiet sort of bye Smeghead that Lister gives him.
Yeah.
And he just sort of nods and looks at him. And
but even Crichton, when he presses the button, seems a bit like, okay, transport, as if it's like, oh, this is the end. And Chris Barry has claimed that that's his line. He came up with that line.
It's a fantastic line.
Yeah. It's because does the cat actually say anything to him in this scene? I don't think he does he? Oh.
No, but he also looks upset too.
Mm. Well, what are they going to do now? It's they're just going to. It's almost like their inhibitions is going away, because when Rimmer's gone, what's going to stop them from just currying themselves into oblivion?
Yeah. Rimmer gets to his quarters, and it's at that point that he discovers that Yavanna was his opponent. He immediately reports to Platini and resigns his commission because Yavanna fell in love with him, and he forfeits the contest. Platini can't understand it, but accepts it, and Rimmer gives him a note for Yavanna. And yeah, it's so cheesy, but it really fucking works.
Yeah. The fact that Rimmer realizes as well what he's done or what he's saying, but he means it. That's the thing. He means it, but he just can't believe he's got to this point. And I think that's what makes it very Red Dwarf. and you know that he's probably going to tell the others something completely different when he gets back. That he missed them, or he felt like they'd be dead in a week or something like that without him. And but he, which is funny because there should be no shame in what he's doing. He's not been sacked. He's not, been proven to be this, that, or the other. He's actually renouncing it and coming back, but he will probably lie about it when he gets back to make himself look better.
You see, I don't think he'd look any better with any story he could make up rather than telling the truth here. But it's funny how people hide things that they think people would find. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We've all done it. We've all done it, haven't we?
It's guarded. It's guarded. If you think about the very beginning of the episode, that he's talking about, well, what's this love mush thing, whatever, and he gets to the end and does the very thing, and he doesn't want to open that part of his, that part of his makeup to the rest of the crew because he's putting that bravado stance on.
Yeah,
it's a wall that he's built.
You kind of get the feeling it because between the sort of friendship between Rimmer and Lister, you kind of get the feeling it could be something that they discuss like one night privately when neither of them could sleep or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, not in front of the others.
Yeah. Yeah. And right, I'm going to lighten this a little and point out that he doesn't do the stupid salute. He does the standard salute for the Enlightenment.
He rocks on.
Yeah, it does look a bit like the Devil's Horn, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's. I prefer. I think we're all in agreement. I prefer the Rimmer salute. But he has that moment, doesn't he? Of in this moment, I am an officer on the Enlightenment.
Yeah, I think the change is really strange because it starts when he realizes he's got the role. Because and that's before anything and all of this happens. It happens when he goes, I won. Yeah. And he can't really take it in, as if like everything that I've wanted has come to fruition, and then this all happens. So it's almost like he's in that mode of like, I can't believe that this has happened. And then he comes to the thing of like, well, actually, is this what I want? And is it what I want for her as well? So I like that right even before he even starts to get on the ship, he's not being, really excited or like, I'm on the ship, I've got it, see you later, smegheads. He's literally like, I've won. I don't quite know how I feel about that, and I like that they went down that route rather than just a straightforward one.
It's almost like he knows that eventually, like no matter what flight of fancy he goes on, his brain will stop him. And it's not bothered that he's managed to stop it this time, but it's because of another outside factor that he's overcome it. But then that ends up working against him anyway.
Yeah.
In that giving him what he wants. Yeah. If only Stocky, the ship's computer, picked somebody else, he'd have gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly that. And I like the way they end it as well. They have a little bit of old film music and a classic look of the end before the theme tune plays. Lovely stuff.
Yeah. Jane Horrocks as Nirvana Crane is probably one of my favourite characters that I'd like to see come back eventually, even if it's just as a cameo thing. I think we've probably all got like a one-off character we'd like to see make a reappearance. For me, it's up there. If maybe just to give Rimmer a happy ending, if they did decide to end the show, it would be interesting to do.
Yeah. Now that's a wonderful question. And I'm not prepared for it, so I don't have an answer yet. But I might put it on the socials when this episode goes up. Which one-time Red Dwarf character would you like to see come back? And I think everybody would have said Dwayne Dibley had he not returned. But which one is the character that you'd like to come back just once?
Yeah, as a character that wasn't played by one of the four.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Crane would be up there. I can imagine our next episode, the Inquisitor would be, that'd be a fun one to get to have there as well. The Revenge of the Inquisitor.
So that's about it for Holoship. Have you got anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to mention?
It's not as good as I remember it. It's still very good. It's as we're in peak Red Dwarf territory. It's definitely not a bad episode. I think some of the cuts are a bit too much for me, like the one on the computer bit, where it's just like it seems that it's too quick and it doesn't really flow properly at that point. What do you think to the fact that they changed the order around to make this the opening episode of the series, bearing in mind that Inquisitor was going to be too sci-fi, and the fact they went for a more of a character piece rather than like the Inquisitor, for example?
I think if you look at the previous series of Red Dwarf, where they did the same thing for Series 4, where Meltdown was supposed to open it.
Yeah.
Well, I was so young at the time and because they're all pretty self-contained, I really don't think it matters at all which bloody episode you put on before the next one. I think series-wise, there's a continuity. Series 4 definitely happens after Series 3, Series 5 definitely happens after Series 4. But you could have easily juggled all 6 episodes in all of the series. And they've done this constantly. And I think they've written it like that. So I don't think it really matters, to be honest with you.
I mean, it's a very Rimmer-heavy episode, obviously. And the others are kind of pushed quite far to the back, I think, in this. I mean, it's proven to be not a popular episode with fans, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I think that it's not as good as I remember it being, but we are in peak 3, 4, 5, 6 territory. So it's interesting that I was expecting this to be a knockout of the park, and I do have some, I think, technical issues more than anything else. I think there's and the story seems crammed and stuff like that. So overall, I still think it's a good episode, but I do think it has issues, and I'm quite surprised that I would be thinking of this on the first episode.
Yeah. I don't know whether I think it's underrated or overrated, because it's a great episode, but it's a great episode amongst exceptional episodes.
I enjoyed it more this time around. I think I just noticed more things that I haven't seen this episode in a long time. I still really enjoyed it, but yeah, there is, as Kurt said, the story's squished to fit that 25 minutes or 30 minutes. And it would be nice to have seen the full. I'm half tempted to go and get the DVD and watch all the deleted stuff.
Yeah.
Just to see how much more it adds to the actual show.
I've been meaning to treat myself to the Blu-rays, and it's stuff like this when we discuss it that makes me think Netflix really is the ginger stepchild of the Blu-ray collection.
Yeah. Well, the Blu-ray collection is, I don't know what we would call the Blu-ray collection, then the DVD collection, then the Body Snatcher collection. You've got a full family.
Doesn't the Blu-ray have, like, everything ever, basically? Yeah.
I think I've spoken about this on another episode. The Blu-rays, I've heard like the earlier series are remastered, but they're not the originally released remastered. They've been remastered. That's what I heard anyway, for the Blu-ray release to clean up the mess that was the remastered series.
Sci-fi shows, eh?
Yeah. They're never fully finished.
So, gentlemen, before we go, where can we find you on the internet? Kurt.
You can find me on Twitter at rmuldrake. That's RMULDRAKE. You can also find me looking at season 7, probably by the time this airs, of the X-Files on the Xcast. That's the X_cast. And we'll be talking things like Star Trek Picard as well on the Make It So podcast. You can find that at Jean-Luc Poddard. So those are probably the best ones to get me on at the moment.
Carl, how about you?
You can find me and everything I'm up to at allmylinks.com /Mr. Carl.
Concise, Carl. Good. For me, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at MarkAdamsHC. I also do 3 other podcasts. One of them is Taking a Rest. It's only done in series. That's Ink Stories. It's a podcast about tattoos at Ink Stories Pod on Instagram and Twitter. The other 2 are still live. Right in the Childhood, which is a podcast about 2 people watching each other's kids' telly. And there's an age difference between me and my friend Fraser. That's Right in the Childhood at RITC Pod on Twitter. And my other podcast based around my job as a humanist celebrant, where I have a different guest to talk about the milestones in their life every fortnight, is Life's Milestones at Life's Milestones on Twitter. And if you want to listen to any of the podcasts mentioned by any of us here, you listen to this, just search for it on your favourite podcast provider, innit?
Aye.
So thank you for joining us. We'll see you in a week. And until then...
Sweaty bollocks shacks.
Sex.
Connery talk coming soon to We Made This.
Constant. Sex. Guilt-free.
Sex.
Review of every Connery
Sex.
film, but in the voice, the whole episode.
Sex.
Elsewhere on We Made This. Gotham University, a Batman podcast.
God, so speaking of masks, there has been some news. It sounds like Zack Snyder is in the news again. What's going on with the masks, Jay?
My boy Zack! Just when you thought that the controversy of Zack Snyder was simmering down, he rose back up and just not only blew up the internet, not only broke the internet, he figuratively and probably literally fucked it right back into hysteria with this whole Batman news going on right now.
We dig music.
I recently watched the movie that came out recently of the book about all the black metal scene.
Oh, yes. I actually have that book.
Lords of Chaos, that's it, yeah. I watched the Lords of Chaos
That's
movie.
the one with
It's
Macaulay
really funny.
Culkin's brother in it.
Yes.
Something like that.
It's really good.
And where they really, really pissed off Varg by casting someone Jewish to play him.
Which is always a good idea.
Yeah.
Always piss off Varg McCann if you can, because he's a f***ing bellend. Not scared of you, Varg, even though you stabbed people 27 times.
And got caught on a train with a rocket launcher at
Yeah.
one point.
He's a bit of a bellend.
A little bit racist. A little bit questionable.
Yeah, just a bit.
Uses papyrus as a font of choice.
And that's his worst crime.
That 100% is. I'm not even joking. Like, he's done some bad shit, but papyrus, unfucking acceptable.
Beautiful.
We are Starfleet, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
Oh, look at Garrick. He looks so cute in this.
Or I'm watching an episode he's not in, and I wonder what Garrick's doing right now.
Where's
Maybe
he
I
at?
should text him and see what he's doing.
Okay,
text him, see if he's watching this. Yeah.
So are you guys like texting buddies? Do you have a group chat going?
Pretty much. Yeah. It's a bit alarming, particularly when I accidentally get CC'd on the Obsidian Order chat. But
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod, and we are part of the We Made This podcast network, which can be found online at wemadethispod.com or on Twitter at We Made This Pod.